It must be the champagne. It's been a hectic day for both of us. This getting married is not as easy as it looks.
Would I say I was a witch if I'm not?
She twitched her nose and made television history. For 8 seasons, she was Samantha Stevens, the charming witch who tried to live an ordinary suburban life with extraordinary powers. But behind that famous smile was a woman who fought for approval she never received, loved men who couldn't give her what she needed, and died far too young with her dignity intact. This is The Unknown Life of Elizabeth Montgomery from Bewitched. The daughter who couldn't win. Elizabeth Victoria. Montgomery was born on April 15, 1933, in Los Angeles, California, into a family where show business wasn't just a career, it was the family business. Her father, Robert Montgomery, was a major film star of the 1930s and 40s, honored with 2 Academy Award nominations. Her mother, Elizabeth Daniel Bryan Allen, had been a Broadway actress in the 1920s before giving up her career to become Robert Montgomery's wife. Elizabeth was the second daughter. The first, Martha Bryan Montgomery, had been born in 1931 and died in infancy from spinal meningitis. Some who knew the family believed Robert Montgomery never fully recovered from losing that first daughter and somehow resented Elizabeth from the beginning, almost for being born. It was a strange dynamic. He loved her, but he couldn't seem to accept her. She also had a younger brother, Robert Montgomery Jr., who would live until 2000. Growing up, Elizabeth was sheltered by her wealthy parents. Robert was strict, controlling in ways that seemed arbitrary. Strangely, he wouldn't let her go to the movies. The very thing he did for a living, he denied his daughter the pleasure of experiencing as an audience member. The family was financially comfortable, living the Hollywood elite lifestyle. But money couldn't buy what Elizabeth wanted most, her father's genuine approval. She grew up watching him be cold to her mother, seeing that he wasn't a good husband. She saw how he used his charm publicly, while being withdrawn and distant at home. These observations would shape how she viewed men and relationships for the rest of her life. In 1950, when Elizabeth was 17, her father's career took the family back to New York City. There, she attended the Spence School, one of the city's most exclusive all-girls schools. After graduating, she enrolled at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts to study acting.
You sure you don't want to take the plane? You'd love it.
How about a train?
She had decided to follow in her parents' footsteps, though this choice would become another source of tension with her father. Robert Montgomery didn't want Elizabeth to be an actress. He knew how brutal the business could be, how it destroyed people, how it required a thick skin and relentless determination. When she told him what she wanted to do, he warned her bluntly that it was one of the most horrifying, ego-blasting, destructive, awful businesses anyone could possibly enter. He said he wouldn't wish it on anyone he cared about, which meant he cared about her, but not enough to support her dream. Still, after that discouraging conversation, he admitted that when acting is rewarding and good, it provides a high you can't imagine. He was right about that part, but he never seemed to believe his daughter could achieve those highs. Even when she did, he found ways to criticize her. Elizabeth made her television debut in 1951 at age 18 on her father's anthology series Robert Montgomery Presents. Over the years, she would appear in about 200 live television programs, gaining experience and building her skills. But working with her father didn't bring them closer. It just gave him more opportunities to find fault. In October 1953, Elizabeth made her Broadway debut in Late Love.
You really didn't remember Daphne, did you?
Not a bit. It's weird. You don't suppose she was a little bit of a snob even then, do you?
Castle, indeed.
And she won a Theatre World Award for her performance. This should have been a triumph, validation that she'd made the right choice pursuing acting, but her father remained harsh. He'd send her notes after performances, picking apart what she'd done wrong on stage, always focused on the flaws rather than the achievements. She returned to Broadway in 1956 with The Loud Red Patrick, continuing to prove herself in live theater. Her early television career consisted of roles in prestigious live dramas, Studio One, Kraft Television Theater, The Twilight Zone, The 11th Hour, Boris Karloff's thriller, Alfred Hitchcock Presents. These weren't small parts or throwaway roles. She was building a reputation as a serious actress who could handle complex dramatic material. In 1960, she was nominated for an Emmy Award for portraying a Southern nightclub performer named Rusty Heller in an episode of The Untouchables. Interestingly, she played opposite David White in that episode, the same actor who would later portray her boss Larry Tate on Bewitched. The television world was small, and these early connections would serve her well later. She also appeared in feature films during this period, though movies never became her primary focus. In 1955, she had a role in Otto Preminger's The Court-Martial of Billy Mitchell, giving her experience working with a prestigious director in a major production. In 1963, she appeared in Who's Been Sleeping in My Bed, alongside Dean Martin and Carol Burnett, showcasing her comedic timing before Bewitched would make that talent famous. Alfred Hitchcock wanted her for his 1964 film Marnie, intending to cast her as the sister-in-law of Sean Connery's character, but Montgomery was unavailable due to other commitments. Missing out on a Hitchcock film might have bothered some actresses, but Elizabeth was building exactly the career she wanted: steady work and quality productions, respect from her peers, and slowly, grudgingly, recognition that she'd made the right choice pursuing acting despite her father's opposition. But she was still building a solid career that never seemed good enough for Robert Montgomery. No matter what she achieved, he found something to criticize, some way she could have done better. The relationship between father and daughter was complicated by another factor: politics. They were diametrically opposed on almost every political issue. Elizabeth was a staunch liberal Democrat and feminist, while her father was a staunch Republican. Their political differences reflected deeper ideological conflicts about how the world should work, and neither could understand the other's perspective. 4 marriages, 4 failures. Elizabeth's complicated relationship with her father colored her relationships with men throughout her life. She was looking for something Robert Montgomery had never given her: warmth, acceptance, unconditional support. But she kept choosing men who couldn't provide what she needed, or she sabotaged relationships before they could succeed. Her first husband was Frederick Gallatin Cameron, a New York City socialite. They married in March 1954, when Elizabeth was only 20 years old. The marriage seemed to come out of nowhere, surprising even friends who thought they knew her well. Robert Montgomery was thrilled because Frederick was young, handsome, rich, and from the upper crust of New York society. Exactly the kind of son-in-law he wanted. But Frederick wanted a traditional society wife, someone who would attend parties and charity events and support his social standing. Elizabeth wanted to be a star. Those two visions were incompatible. Less than a year later, in August 1955, Elizabeth filed for divorce in Las Vegas, charging cruelty. Frederick later said she thought her career demanded that she head back to Hollywood, and he didn't see how he could fit in out there. The divorce cost Frederick more than his marriage. His social standing changed when the new edition of the Social Register was published. Elizabeth Montgomery had done to Frederick Gallatin Cameron what her father had done to his second wife, removing him from society's exclusive club through divorce. Within a year of that divorce, Elizabeth married again. This time, she chose actor Gig Young, who was much older than her, approximately her father's age. Young would go on to win the Best Supporting Actor Oscar in 1970 for They Shoot Horses, Don't They? But when Elizabeth married him in 1956, he was already dealing with alcoholism and what some believed were untreated bipolar disorder symptoms. Robert Montgomery was furious about this marriage, which may have been part of Elizabeth's motivation. If she knew something bothered her father, she would do it deliberately. Marrying an older actor with problems was her way of rebelling, of zinzing him. But the marriage was miserable. Young's drinking and mental health issues made home life chaotic and sometimes abusive. Elizabeth stayed for 7 years before divorcing him in 1963. During her unhappy marriage to Gig Young, Elizabeth made a film called Johnny Cool in 1963. The director was William Asher, who was 12 years her senior. Asher was a successful television and film producer-director, and when they met, his personal life was extraordinarily complicated. He had separated from his first wife, Danny Sue Nolan, who was the mother of his 2 children, Leanne and Brian. While directing Elizabeth in Johnny Cool, Asher was having affairs with 3 women simultaneously. Despite, or perhaps because of, this complexity, Elizabeth and Asher developed feelings for each other during filming. After Johnny Cool wrapped, Asher went east to help create and direct The Patty Duke Show. He took a 2-bedroom suite in a hotel, and there were literally days when he had one woman in one bedroom and somebody else in the other bedroom, with neither knowing the other was there. Elizabeth became pregnant with Asher's child. They married in 1963, and this time, she'd found something close to happiness. Asher created the role of Samantha Stevens specifically with Elizabeth in mind. When Bewitched premiered in September 1964, it was an immediate hit, becoming the #2 show in America behind Bonanza. The series would run for 8 seasons, making Elizabeth one of the most recognizable faces on television. She and Asher had 3 children together: William Jr., born July 24, 1960, 1964, Robert, born October 5, 1965, and Rebecca Elizabeth, born June 17, 1969. Elizabeth's latter two pregnancies were written into Bewitched as Samantha's pregnancies, with Tabitha and Adam Stevens joining the cast. For several years, Elizabeth's professional and personal lives aligned perfectly. She loved playing Samantha and later said she was never bored during those 8 years on set. Not one single minute. Working with Asher as producer and director created an unusual dynamic where home life and work life blended together, but for a while, it worked beautifully. Bewitched became more than just a hit show. It put ABC on the map as a competitive network. Before Bewitched, ABC struggled to compete with CBS and NBC. The show's success proved ABC could produce quality programming that attracted massive audiences. At its peak, Bewitched was ABC's highest-rated half-hour primetime series until Happy Days arrived years later. Elizabeth also played Samantha's mischievous cousin Serena under the pseudonym Pandora Spox, a pun on Pandora's box, allowing her to showcase different acting abilities. Serena was everything Samantha wasn't: wild, rebellious, free-spirited, flirtatious. Playing both characters gave Elizabeth opportunities to stretch as an actress, even within the confines of a sitcom format. One of the show's most famous elements came from Elizabeth herself, when director William Asher was trying to figure out a signature gesture for Samantha's magic. He noticed that when Elizabeth got nervous in real life, she twitched her upper lip, which caused her nose to follow, creating the impression she was twitching her nose. They incorporated this natural gesture into the character, and it became one of television's most recognizable trademarks. Elizabeth appeared in all 254 episodes of Bewitched, every single one. She was the only cast member with perfect attendance across 8 seasons. That kind of commitment was rare then, and would be almost unheard of today. She showed up, did the work, and made it look effortless, even when things were falling apart behind the scenes. The show earned Elizabeth 5 Emmy nominations and 4 Golden Globe nominations, though she never won either award. The lack of Emmy recognition particularly stung. 5 nominations without a win suggested that the Television Academy didn't take her work seriously, perhaps because Bewitched was a sitcom, perhaps because she played a witch. Whatever the reason, the snub reflected a broader failure to recognize her talent. More importantly, it made her wealthy. She owned 20% of Bewitched, and the show's continued success in syndication would earn her millions over the years. But behind the scenes, problems were developing. With Bewitched's success and Asher's producing and directing schedule, he became enormously busy. Sometimes people can't see what's right in front of them. Both Elizabeth and Asher had affairs. During the 8th season of the show, Elizabeth fell in love with director Richard Michaels. Their affair led to the end of both their marriages. Bewitched was canceled after the 1971-72 season, not by ABC, but by Elizabeth herself. She'd had enough. She'd played Samantha for 254 episodes, appearing in every single one, and she wanted to move on to other roles. But she still had a couple of years left on her contract with ABC, so the network cast her in her first TV movie, Post-Bewitched: The Victim, in 1972. Elizabeth and Asher's marriage officially ended in 1973. The divorce was difficult, especially regarding the children. After Elizabeth moved out to live with Richard Michaels, there was about a year when the children didn't see much of their mother. She wasn't a full-time mother during that period. After that year, she wanted to return to the marriage, but Asher's heart was broken. He felt he couldn't trust her anymore. The damage was done. Years later, toward the end of his life, Asher still longed for Elizabeth. He cried his heart out for her, claiming their split was his fault. He never got over her, but by then, it was too late to repair what had been broken. Elizabeth's relationship with Richard Michaels lasted about 2.5 years before ending. She'd sworn off marriage, convinced she was done with that particular institution. But in 1973, while filming the TV movie Mrs. Sundance, she met actor Robert Foxworth. He was 9 years younger than her, and she loved that he'd never seen an episode of Bewitched. He didn't know her as Samantha. He just knew her as Elizabeth. Their connection was immediate and profound.
It is 10 minutes before the hour. Tonight on CBS, Elizabeth Montgomery and Robert Foxworth star in a real-life drama.
Elizabeth felt comfortable with him in ways she hadn't with previous partners, but she refused to marry him. For 20 years, Foxworth kept asking, and for 20 years, she kept saying no. Finally, on January 28, 1993, she agreed. They were married in a quiet ceremony, with very few people even knowing about it. The marriage remained private until after her death. Those 20 years with Robert before their marriage were the happiest of Elizabeth's life. She'd finally found the inner tranquility that had eluded her for decades. She became a real homebody, a wonderful cook who loved working in her garden. Her children were a huge part of her life, and Robert's children from a previous marriage adored her. Helping maintain family harmony was Asher's third wife, actress Joyce Bulifant, to whom he was married from 1976 until 1993. Joyce made sure that on every Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthday, and anniversary, Bill's first wife and whoever she was dating, and Elizabeth and Robert, and all the children would gather together. No child would feel their parents were choosing partners over them. The brothers and sisters could all be together, and their parents could be friends, setting an example of mature, respectful behavior despite past difficulties. The actress who refused to be typecast. After Bewitched ended, Elizabeth was determined to prove she could do more than play a charming witch. She immediately made a dramatic about-face, taking on serious, controversial roles in television movies. In 1974, she starred in A Case of Rape, playing Ellen Harrod, a woman who is assaulted and then faces the trauma of the legal system's treatment of rape victims. The film was groundbreaking for its time and remains one of the highest-rated TV movies ever broadcast. Elizabeth earned another Emmy nomination for her unflinching portrayal. In 1975, she played Lizzie Borden in The Legend of Lizzie Borden, portraying the woman accused of murdering her father and stepmother with an axe in 1892 Fall River, Massachusetts. Elizabeth and Lizzie Borden were actually sixth cousins once removed, both descending from 17th century Massachusetts resident John Luther. When her father heard she was playing Lizzie Borden, he took it personally, reportedly telling her, "Oh, you would," implying she'd chosen the role to spite him by playing a woman who murdered her father. The role earned Elizabeth yet another Emmy nomination. Over her career, she would receive 9 Emmy nominations total, but never win the award. A curious oversight for someone who'd achieved such success and critical acclaim. She continued making TV movies throughout the 1970s and 80s, choosing projects that challenged her and surprised audiences. In 1977, she made A Killing Affair with O.J. Simpson, dealing with the then controversial subject of interracial relationships. In 1978, she starred in the miniseries The Awakening Land, playing a pioneer woman facing hardship in 1820s Ohio, earning her 9th Emmy nomination. In 1985, she played a rare villainous role in Amos, portraying a vicious nurse who abuses elderly residents in her care. The wards were played by Kirk Douglas and Dorothy McGuire, among others. Elizabeth enjoyed playing against type, showing range that went far beyond Samantha's sweet nature. In 1989, she returned to Broadway one final time in a production of Love Letters opposite Robert Foxworth. It was fitting that her last stage appearance was with the man who'd become her life partner. Throughout her later career, Elizabeth used her celebrity to support causes she believed in with genuine commitment, not just celebrity photo opportunities. She was one of the first major actresses to advocate publicly for AIDS research and patients' rights during the height of the crisis in the 1980s, when many celebrities stayed silent because of the stigma attached to the disease. She worked closely with AMFAR, the American Foundation for AIDS Research, and the AIDS Project Los Angeles, attending fundraisers, speaking out publicly, and using her fame to draw attention to a cause that desperately needed it. In June 1992, she and her former Bewitched co-star Dick Sargent, who had played the second Darren from 1969 to 1972, served as Grand Marshals at the Los Angeles Gay Pride Parade.
Our Grand Marshals. This year, they are Elizabeth Montgomery and her very close friend and co-worker, Dick Sargent. Their appearance today...
Sargent had recently come out as gay, and Elizabeth's willingness to stand beside him at that parade made a powerful statement. This wasn't the early 2000s when supporting LGBTQ rights had become relatively safe for celebrities. This was 1992, when such support could genuinely damage careers and generate backlash. Elizabeth didn't care. She believed in equality and wasn't afraid to say so publicly. Her political activism went beyond domestic issues. She was an outspoken critic of the Vietnam War during the late 1960s and early 1970s, when such opposition was controversial and could invite accusations of being unpatriotic. She supported Robert F. Kennedy's presidential campaign in 1968, devastated when he was assassinated that June. In 1988, she and Foxworth supported Jesse Jackson's presidential campaign, believing in his progressive platform even though Jackson faced long odds as a candidate. She narrated 2 political documentaries that were sharply critical of U.S. foreign policy: Cover Up Behind the Iran-Contra Affair in 1988 and The Panama Deception in 1992. The latter won an Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature, bringing mainstream attention to controversial U.S. actions in Panama. Lending her famous voice to these projects put Elizabeth squarely on one side of bitter political debates, but she believed the truth mattered more than protecting her image. During the last year of her life, Elizabeth volunteered at the Los Angeles unit of Learning Ally, a nonprofit organization that records educational audiobooks for disabled people. She was devoted to women's rights, animal rights, and supporting the disabled community. Despite her advocacy and continued work, Elizabeth remained intensely private about her personal life. She declined to be interviewed during the last 20 years of her life. When she married Foxworth in 1993, they didn't announce it publicly. People only learned about the marriage after her death. The final 8 weeks. In late 1994 and early 1995, Elizabeth was filming a television movie called Deadline for Murder from the files of Edna Buchanan. During production, she started experiencing symptoms that seemed like the flu: fatigue, weakness, weight loss, abdominal discomfort. She'd felt similar things before and dismissed them as nothing serious. By the time filming wrapped in March 1995, Robert Foxworth was alarmed by how much weight she'd lost and how exhausted she seemed. Elizabeth finally agreed to see doctors at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. After exploratory surgery, they delivered devastating news. She had stage 4 colorectal cancer that had already spread to her liver. The diagnosis came in March 1995. There was nothing doctors could do. Elizabeth was too weak for radiation therapy, and the cancer was too advanced for surgery to be effective. They sent her home.
An actor is all Elizabeth Montgomery ever wanted to be. She died today of cancer at age 62 in her Los Angeles home, surrounded by her family.
Elizabeth chose not to die in a hospital. She returned to her 26-room Beverly Hills home that she shared with Foxworth. She kept the diagnosis private, telling only her immediate family. She wanted to die quietly, with dignity, away from public attention, exactly as she'd lived for the past 2 decades. In April 1995, she had surgery to remove a small malignant tumor, one last attempt to slow the disease's progression. But there was no hope of recovery, and Elizabeth knew it. She spent her final weeks at home, weak but determined to control how her story ended. On the morning of May 18, 1995, Elizabeth Montgomery died at age 62. Just 8 weeks after her diagnosis. Her 3 children, William, Robert Jr., and Rebecca Asher, and her husband Robert Foxworth, were waiting in the living room. Elizabeth didn't want them to see her in those final moments. She died privately, maintaining control and dignity to the very end. The same day Elizabeth died, her Johnny Cool co-star, Elisha Cook Jr., also passed away. The coincidence seemed almost supernatural, fitting for an actress who'd played a witch so convincingly. Elizabeth's body was cremated. There was no funeral, no public memorial service. A month later, on June 18, 1995, a private memorial was held at the Cannon Theater in Beverly Hills for family, friends, and colleagues. Jazz musician Herbie Hancock played music. Singer Amanda McBroom performed. Author Dominic Dunn spoke about the early years of his friendship with Elizabeth when they both lived in New York City. Robert Foxworth read sympathy cards that had been sent by fans. Elizabeth's daughter, brother, stepson, and nurse also spoke. In 1998, Elizabeth's children and husband donated her wardrobe for auction, raising money for AIDS charities, a final contribution to a cause she'd championed during her life. The woman behind the witch.
As Samantha the Witch in the long-running series Bewitched, Elizabeth created one of television's most memorable characters.
Elizabeth Montgomery spent 8 years playing Samantha Stevens, and for many people, that's all she ever was. They couldn't see past the witch who twitched her nose and created magical chaos. But Elizabeth was so much more than that single role, no matter how iconic it became. She was a woman who desperately wanted her father's approval and never fully received it, even though she achieved far greater television fame than he ever had. Some people believe believed Robert Montgomery was ultimately jealous that Elizabeth became a bigger star than he'd ever been, which may explain why he never could fully embrace her success. She was someone who struggled with relationships, who made bad choices in partners, who had affairs and broke hearts and got her own heart broken. She married 4 times, searching for something she couldn't quite define, until she finally found it with Robert Foxworth, but only after 2 decades of refusing to make it official. She was an activist who used her celebrity for causes she believed in, who wasn't afraid to take controversial political stances, who stood up for marginalized communities when it wasn't fashionable or career-enhancing to do so. She was a mother who admitted she'd never win any Mother of the Year awards, but did her best to raise her children well. Her son, William Jr., became a successful guitar maker, creating custom instruments for famous musicians. Her other children found their own paths, and despite the complications of their parents' divorce, they maintained relationships with both sides of the family. She was an actress who took risks, who refused to be typecast, who played rape victims and axe murderers and pioneer women and corrupt nurses because she wanted to challenge herself and surprise audiences. She was nominated 9 times for Emmy Awards and never won, but the nominations themselves proved she was more than just Samantha Stevens. When Bewitched first aired, some people worried the show promoted witchcraft and occult practices, but what it actually promoted was tolerance and acceptance. The entire premise was that Samantha and Darren loved each other despite their fundamental differences. She had magical powers, he was mortal, and somehow they made it work. For 1960s television, that was a radical message about accepting people who weren't like you. Elizabeth understood that message and lived it in her own life. She advocated for AIDS patients when the disease was stigmatized and misunderstood. She marched in gay pride parades when it could have damaged her career. She spoke out against wars and political corruption because she believed remaining silent made you complicit. Toward the end of her life, even Robert Montgomery finally came around. After decades of criticism and distance, father and daughter found some measure of peace. There was no hate between them in those final years, just love. Complicated, imperfect love, but love nonetheless. Elizabeth Montgomery died too young, at just 62, from a cancer that might have been caught earlier if she'd paid attention to symptoms and sought medical care sooner. But she lived on her own terms, made her own choices, good and bad, and left behind a body of work that continues to entertain and inspire new generations. A 9-foot bronze statue of Elizabeth as Samantha Stevens riding side saddle on her broomstick now stands in a downtown park in Salem, Massachusetts, home to the infamous witch trials of the 17th century. It's a fitting memorial to a woman who brought magic to millions of living rooms and proved that sometimes the most enchanting thing about a witch is the very human woman who plays her. If you enjoyed learning about Elizabeth Montgomery's remarkable life beyond Bewitched, please like and subscribe to our channel for more stories about the stars who shaped television history.